In ancient Greece, wealth was more than a means of survival. It was a symbol of status, influence, and power. The polis, the city-state, was the center of Greek life, where money dictated social standing and political clout. Unlike earlier societies where aristocracy was based primarily on noble lineage and land ownership, the rise of trade in the classical period reshaped the power dynamics. Merchants, once seen as mere facilitators of exchange, began amassing fortunes that rivaled those of the traditional elite. This shift created tensions, as wealth became a tool for social mobility, allowing some to challenge the established hierarchy. However, this economic transformation also deepened the gap between the rich and the poor. The working class, composed of farmers, artisans, and laborers, found themselves increasingly dependent on the economic policies dictated by the wealthy elite. In Athens, for example, Solon's reforms sought to mitigate the growing inequalities, yet the obsession with wealth persisted, becoming an inescapable force in Greek society. The political landscape of ancient Greece was also shaped by money. In Athens, the birth of democracy did not eliminate the power of wealth. It merely changed its form. While all free male citizens could technically participate in governance, true political influence often remained concentrated in the hands of the wealthy. The ability to sponsor public works, fund military campaigns, or support artistic endeavors granted the elite a level of prestige that translated into political leverage. In oligarchic city-states like Sparta, wealth was less overt but still played a crucial role. The Spartan system discouraged the accumulation of personal riches, yet the ruling class maintained control over vast resources, ensuring their dominance. This duality, where wealth was both a necessity and a source of corruption, fueled philosophical debates about the role of money in society. Could wealth coexist with virtue, or was it inherently corrupting? These questions would later be central to the philosophies of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The great philosophers of Greece had complex relationships with money. Socrates, for instance, lived in relative poverty, claiming that the pursuit of wisdom was far superior to material gain. He openly criticized those who valued wealth above character, arguing that true fulfillment came from self-examination and intellectual growth. Plato, his student, took a more structured approach. In his ideal republic, he proposed a ruling class of philosopher kings who would live communally, free from personal wealth, to prevent corruption. Aristotle, in contrast, acknowledged the practical necessity of money but warned against excess. He argued for a golden mean, where wealth should serve life's higher purposes rather than dominate them. Yet, while these thinkers debated the ethical dimensions of money, they largely accepted its presence in society. It was the Cynics who took the most radical stance, rejecting wealth outright and embracing a life of voluntary poverty. This extreme rejection of materialism was not merely philosophical. It was a direct challenge to the values of Greek society. The Cynics emerged as a counterculture movement against the growing materialism of their time. They saw wealth as a distraction, an artificial construct that enslaved people to unnecessary desires. Rather than seeking comfort, status, or luxury, they pursued self-sufficiency, autarkeia, and lived according to nature. To them, civilization had imposed artificial needs that only served to create dependency and inequality. The most famous of these radical thinkers was Diogenes of Cynic, who would take this philosophy to its extreme. He did not merely critique wealth, he ridiculed it, challenged its legitimacy, and lived in a way that made a mockery of society's obsession with money. If Greek culture revered wealth, Diogenes sought to prove that one could live a full and meaningful life without it. His life would become a testament to the idea that freedom was not found in accumulating riches, but in shedding them. Diogenes of Cynic was not born into poverty, nor was he initially a man who rejected wealth. His early life was tied to money in a way that would shape his future philosophy in an unexpected manner. His father was a banker, responsible for minting currency in Sinope, a Greek city on the Black Sea. This connection to money took a dramatic turn when Diogenes was accused of defacing coins. Whether this was an act of fraud or an early expression of his disdain for wealth remains debated. Some say he was merely caught in a scandal, while others believe he intentionally sought to deface the currency in both a literal and philosophical sense. Regardless, the event led to his exile, forcing him to leave behind his home, his status, and whatever wealth he may have had. From this moment, he embarked on a journey that would redefine the meaning of freedom and necessity. Instead of trying to reclaim a conventional life, Diogenes embraced exile as an opportunity to question everything society deemed valuable, starting with money itself. Arriving in Athens, Diogenes found inspiration in the teachings of Antisthenes, a disciple of Socrates and one of the earliest proponents of Cynicism. Antisthenes had already begun advocating for a life free from luxury and excess, but Diogenes would take these ideas to their extreme. He discarded all possessions except for a cloak, a staff, and a small bowl, until he saw a child drinking water with his hands and realized even the bowl was unnecessary. This radical approach was not an act of mere deprivation, but a deliberate philosophical stance. He sought self-sufficiency, autarkeia, to free himself from dependence on anything external. Unlike other philosophers who theorized about the dangers of wealth while still living in relative comfort, Diogenes chose to embody his beliefs completely. He did not simply critique the world. He lived in direct opposition to it, turning himself into a living argument against materialism. His most famous rejection of wealth came in his legendary encounter with Alexander the Great. The young conqueror, fascinated by Diogenes' reputation, sought him out and offered to grant him anything he desired. Most men would have asked for riches, power, or land, but Diogenes had no use for such things. Lying in the sun, he simply responded, "Move aside, you're blocking my light." This moment became emblematic of his entire philosophy. To Diogenes, even the greatest ruler on earth had nothing to offer him, because he had already freed himself from the desires that enslaved others. While Alexander commanded armies, Diogenes commanded himself, and in that sense, he saw himself as the more powerful of the two. This fearless attitude extended to all aspects of his life. He would mock the wealthy, challenge social conventions, and engage in public acts meant to shock people into questioning their own values. But his life was not one of mere provocation. It was a rigorous philosophical experiment. He believed that human beings should live according to nature, unburdened by the artificial expectations imposed by society. He slept in a large ceramic jar, ate whatever he could find, and ridiculed the need for luxury. Where others saw poverty, he saw freedom. While many pitied him, he pitied them in return, believing they were the ones trapped, slaves to their own ambitions, constantly chasing wealth, comfort, and approval. For Diogenes, true wealth was not measured in possessions but in the ability to need nothing. His life was a challenge, a question posed to the world. If you can be happy with nothing, then what power does money truly have over you? To Diogenes, money was not just unnecessary. It was a grand illusion, a construct that enslaved people without them realizing it. Unlike physical needs such as food and shelter, which were dictated by nature, money was a human invention that created artificial dependencies. People spent their lives accumulating it, believing it would bring security or happiness, yet the pursuit of wealth only deepened their enslavement. The more one had, the more one feared losing it. The rich became prisoners of their own possessions, constantly guarding their status, while the poor became trapped in endless labor to survive. Diogenes saw this cycle as absurd. He rejected the very premise that wealth was needed for a meaningful life. He demonstrated through his own existence that by stripping away unnecessary desires, one could achieve a level of freedom impossible for even the wealthiest rulers. His contempt for money was not simply theoretical. It was a direct attack on the structures that upheld Greek society. Publicly, Diogenes exposed the contradictions of wealth by mocking the powerful. He would walk through the marketplace during the day with a lantern, claiming to be searching for an honest man, a scathing indictment of a society driven by greed and deception. He would beg from statues to demonstrate the futility of asking anything from the rich. His very presence was a challenge. If money was truly essential, how could he, A man with nothing lives so freely. He taunted the wealthy and the politically powerful, showing that despite their riches, they still suffered from anxiety, ambition, and dissatisfaction. His acts were not mere stunts, but philosophical statements. He forced people to confront uncomfortable truths. If they truly believed money brought happiness, why were so many of them miserable? Why did the richest citizens remain restless, always seeking more? To Diogenes, the answer was clear. Money was not a solution but a trap. The philosopher also saw wealth as a tool of control. The ruling class used it to manipulate the lower classes, ensuring their dependence. Those who had money dictated the rules, forcing others into servitude, whether through direct oppression or through the invisible chains of societal expectation. The illusion of wealth allowed elites to maintain power without needing direct force. People willingly enslaved themselves in pursuit of riches. Diogenes subverted this dynamic by rejecting money entirely, making himself untouchable. He owed nothing to anyone, feared no loss, and was beyond bribery or persuasion. This independence gave him the power to speak freely, to mock kings and philosophers alike, unconcerned with consequences. He exposed the great irony of civilization. Those who claimed to be free were often the most constrained, while those who had nothing were the only ones truly liberated. This radical stance finds echoes in later critiques of capitalism and materialism. Karl Marx, centuries later, would argue that economic systems create illusions of freedom while reinforcing dependence on the wealthy. Henry David Thoreau, like Diogenes, would advocate for simplicity and self-sufficiency, seeing wealth as a distraction from life's deeper truths. Even modern thinkers warn of the psychological traps of consumerism, where people define their worth through possessions. Diogenes was one of the first to recognize this cycle, long before capitalism or industrial economies existed. His rejection of money was not primitive, it was prophetic. He saw with clarity what many still struggle to understand, that wealth is only valuable if you believe in its importance. The moment you stop chasing it, you become free. At the core of Diogenes' philosophy was the pursuit of ataraxia, a state of inner peace that could only be achieved by freeing oneself from unnecessary desires. Unlike the Stoics, who sought tranquility through rational self-control, or the Epicureans, who pursued moderate pleasure, the Cynics believed that true freedom came from rejecting social conventions altogether. Diogenes took this idea to its extreme, reducing his needs to the absolute minimum. He lived in a discarded ceramic jar instead of a house, wore a simple cloak regardless of the weather, and ate whatever he could find. To outsiders, his lifestyle seemed like miserable poverty, but to him, it was a declaration of independence. He had stripped life down to its essentials, proving that a person could exist without luxury, without possessions, and without concern for societal expectations. In doing so, he exposed the absurdity of those who spent their lives chasing status and wealth, believing them to be sources of happiness. Diogenes was not merely indifferent to status, he actively ridiculed it. He mocked Plato, calling his grand philosophical ideas useless distractions. When Plato defined a human as a featherless biped, Diogenes plucked a chicken, brought it into the academy, and declared, "Behold, a man." He saw Plato's elaborate theories as detached from reality, a philosopher trapped by the same intellectual vanity he claimed to transcend. But Diogenes' contempt extended beyond philosophers. He openly insulted rulers and the wealthy elite, exposing the fragility of their authority. Unlike other thinkers who sought royal patronage or political influence, Diogenes had no interest in flattering the powerful. He could not be bribed, threatened, or coerced because he wanted nothing from them. This made him a uniquely dangerous figure, someone who could not be controlled because he had stripped himself of all dependencies. His lifestyle was a challenge to the idea that status held any real value. He did not just ignore social hierarchy, he actively undermined it. He would eat in public, something considered improper in Greek society, to show that the rules governing behavior were arbitrary. He defecated in the theater, mocking the idea that people would gather to watch actors pretend to be someone else but were offended by a natural bodily function. He masturbated in the marketplace, saying that if only hunger could be satisfied as easily, life would be much simpler. These acts were not performed out of vulgarity, but as direct criticisms of society's hypocrisy. People obsessed over maintaining appearances while ignoring fundamental truths about existence. To Diogenes, most social customs were distractions from the reality of life, tools designed to control behavior rather than to serve any meaningful purpose. His rejection of status resonates even in modern times, where success is often measured by wealth, fame, and recognition. Today, people chase careers they despise, buy things they do not need, and seek approval from others, all in pursuit of an idea of success that never truly satisfies. Diogenes' life serves as a radical counterpoint, a reminder that status is only meaningful if one believes in it. If a person can be happy without wealth, without titles, without external validation, then they are beyond society's control. This is the essence of cynicism: freedom through simplicity, power through detachment, and wisdom through the rejection of illusion. Diogenes did not live to impress, to acquire, or to conform. He lived to prove that none of those things were necessary in the first place. In a world dominated by consumerism, where success is often equated with wealth and possessions, Diogenes' philosophy feels more radical than ever. Modern society constantly reinforces the idea that happiness is tied to material accumulation. Bigger houses, expensive cars, luxury brands, financial security. Advertisements fuel an endless cycle of desire, convincing people that they are incomplete without the next purchase. Yet, despite the abundance of goods, levels of stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction remain high. Diogenes rejected this illusion over 2,000 years ago, showing that the pursuit of wealth does not lead to fulfillment but to dependence. His extreme minimalism serves as a direct counterpoint to modern consumer culture, challenging the very foundations of a system built on manufactured needs. While few would choose to live exactly as he did, his core message remains powerful. True freedom comes from needing less, not from having more. Psychological studies today support what Diogenes intuitively understood. Beyond a certain point, wealth does not increase happiness. The phenomenon known as the hedonic treadmill explains how people constantly adapt to new levels of wealth, always wanting more but never feeling permanently satisfied. Diogenes had already exposed this cycle in ancient Greece, mocking those who endlessly pursued riches, believing they would find contentment at some distant finish line. His philosophy offers an alternative. Instead of chasing more, learn to be content with less. This mindset aligns with modern movements like minimalism, voluntary simplicity, and even aspects of Stoicism, which emphasize reducing unnecessary desires to achieve peace of mind. The idea is not to reject all comforts, but to recognize that happiness is not dependent on material status. In this sense, Diogenes was not just a provocateur. He was a precursor to a mindset that remains deeply relevant today. The rejection of materialism also intersects with a growing awareness of sustainability and environmental concerns. The relentless pursuit of economic growth has led to environmental destruction, resource depletion, and climate crises. People consume more than they need, driven by a culture that equates excess with success. Diogenes' radical simplicity presents a philosophical challenge to this mindset. If a man can live with almost nothing and still find meaning, why do modern societies require constant expansion, production, and consumption to feel fulfilled? His life questions the very assumptions that fuel modern capitalism. Does progress require endless consumption? Or is there wisdom in choosing deliberate limitations? While he did not frame his ideas in environmental terms, his philosophy aligns with the notion that a more sustainable world may require a fundamental shift in values, away from excess and toward sufficiency. Despite the vast differences between ancient Greece and today, Diogenes' ideas remain a striking counterpoint to modern life. His rejection of social expectations, his contempt for wealth, and his belief in self-sufficiency all challenge the pressures of contemporary existence. He reminds us that freedom is not found in external achievements, but in inner detachment. While few would go to his extremes, his philosophy encourages deep reflection. What do we truly need to live well? Are our desires natural, or have they been implanted by society? What illusions are we still trapped by? In an age where people are more connected yet lonelier than ever, wealthier yet less satisfied, more advanced yet more anxious, perhaps Diogenes offers a forgotten wisdom, that life's greatest freedom is found not in gaining more, but in needing less. Diogenes lived in defiance of everything society held valuable: wealth, status, reputation. Yet, paradoxically, his name endures as one of the most fascinating philosophers of all time. He had no formal school, wrote no books, and left behind no disciples in the traditional sense. And yet, his legacy remains, not through doctrines or institutions, but through the sheer force of his life and the uncompromising nature of his ideas. He was a living critique of materialism, a walking challenge to every assumption people take for granted. His message was simple yet profound. Freedom is not found in accumulation, but in the rejection of unnecessary desires. This lesson is perhaps more relevant today than it was in ancient Greece. In a world consumed by consumerism, status anxiety, and the never-ending pursuit of wealth, Diogenes offers a radical alternative. What if the solution isn't to have more, but to need less? His philosophy isn't just about minimalism. It's about reclaiming autonomy, refusing to be controlled by external forces, and questioning the very foundations of modern life. His extreme choices may not be for everyone, but the underlying truth remains. Happiness is not dictated by possessions, but by our ability to live in alignment with our true needs. Diogenes forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Are we truly free, or are we slaves to money and social expectations? How much of what we chase is genuinely necessary, and how much is simply imposed by the world around us? If everything we believe to be important were stripped away, would we still know who we are? These are not easy questions, but they are essential ones. The life of Diogenes is not an instruction manual. It is a mirror. And what we see in that mirror depends entirely on how willing we are to confront the illusions we live by. Ultimately, Diogenes left behind no wealth, no possessions, and no power. And yet, over 2 millennia later, we are still talking about him. Perhaps that, in itself, is proof that he was right all along.